Well, greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome back once again, or for the very first time, to the Farts and Crap Show, where today, as per usual, it's your host Anjo here, and as per not usual, this is a Stick Tips update video to a video that I already made, which was part 29 of this ongoing series, where I talk about controllers and things that are user interface related to gaming. And on that episode, I talked about the recent Brook firmware for the Wingman XE2. Now, upon further testing, I have found that some of the things that I said in that video weren't entirely accurate. And we have a couple of new updates as well, based on newer versions of things that came out. And another little thing about the previous version of this device, the Wingman XE, which was like the magenta pink one. So, yeah, let's get right into it. I'm going to try to keep this a little bit shorter. But we are going to have all the information first, and then a little bit of gameplay, some closing thoughts, and at the end of the video, of course, the actual channel updates, the special thanks, all that sort of thing. So, if you guys are unfamiliar, this is the URL for the Brook accessory website where you can download firmware updates. And unfortunately not previous versions of firmware to roll back, which I'm hoping they do at some point, but this is the most recent at the time of recording, Wingman XE2 firmware version 1.2.1.0, or for the tournament edition, I believe is what TE stands for. TE. Couldn't resist. Version 1.1.6.2. Now, I'm not sure if I mentioned this in the previous one, so I'll just say it for this one. I did find better results afterward. I did mention in part 29, actually getting the update installed was a bit of a hassle. What ended up working better is actually installing, because, okay, if you hit the download button for either PC or Mac, it, and I'm not entirely sure on the Mac side because I'm not a Mac user, it downloads the firmware update software. So when you connect the device, it'll tell you what version the software is on and the newest version available for either standard or tournament edition. Now, what ended up working better is installing the tournament edition of the firmware first, and then repeating the process and installing the standard version of the firmware. The tournament edition did seem to have better stability, but you can't use turbo, you can't use macros, you can't use remap. And for some reason, because I don't use any of those anyway, at least on the adapter side, but for some reason, L2 and R2 also does not work on the tournament edition. I'm not sure why, it just doesn't recognize the inputs at all. Otherwise, it would have stayed on the tournament edition firmware. Because performance-wise, other than no L2 and R2, it did seem to work a little bit better. And these are all the notes. I'm not going to go... These are all the patch notes for this firmware update, so I'm not going to go through all of these. I already did that in part 29. But here it is on screen if you want to read them over and everything. And since I made part 29, there was actually also an update for the previous version, the regular XE. This was version 1.5G, and this released like a week after I made that video. And the tournament edition, which is 2.9E. Now, I don't know why they went with that like nomenclature or whatever, but I did the same thing for this one. Installed the tournament edition first, and then, disconnected, reconnected, repeated the process, and installed the standard edition of the firmware. And a lot of the patch notes are similar or the same. The other thing I don't really understand about this update in particular is the analog zoom feature. Like, I'm not sure what that's for, personally. But I did test this one after updating pretty extensively, and it's all the same compatibility stuff with the added controller compatibility. I don't have any of these controllers, really, except for the SN30 Pro USB, which it does work. And it's fine. It's good. Functionally, it feels like the XE2 now a little bit, but it is using an older version. It is using an older chip set on the inside of it, so it doesn't have like the lower latency that the newer XE2 has. But other than that, it feels pretty good. And I believe all the compatibility stuff I said in part 29 also applies to this adapter as well, with the exception of the things I'm going to correct here in a minute. So, and I think it's, as far as the update goes for the two devices, I think it's basically a lot of the same code and stuff, because a lot of the things seem to be similar or carried over, especially with compatibility. So the other thing that's applicable from last time is, because I did some testing like with a good number of 8BitDo controllers, as it turns out, the firmware updater and the Ultimate software both had updates. So firmware updater is now on version 2.48 at the time of testing. At the time of recording, like, I haven't checked today, but I thought this was relevant in like the notes about the update, because they said added support for Pro 2 wired controller designed for Xbox. And I was like, hey, that was one of the controllers that I tested in part 29, and there wasn't actually an update for the controller. It was still version 1.70, which I thought I used firmware updater to update, so not sure what the deal is there. But anyway, it was relevant to one of the controllers I tested, so I thought I'd share that. And the 8BitDo Ultimate software for PC. So there's two versions of Ultimate software. There's the one you download from their website that is for most of their controllers. And then there's the one, the Microsoft Store, which is mostly for the Xbox like branded controllers. So for the Pro 2 for Xbox, for example, you have to use the version from the Microsoft Store, not the PC version. So this was on version 2.16. Apparently I did miss an update, and fixed the issue of incorrect ABXY buttons when configuring macros in X input and D input mode for the Ultimate wired controller. Again, that was one of the controllers I did testing for that last episode, so I was like, I may as well include that. And again, there was no firmware update for that controller, but I went ahead and went into Ultimate software and stuff just to check things out, and a bit more on that here in a second. But as far as compatibility stuff goes, yeah, I said before in part 29, the 8BitDo Pro 2 wired, which on version 1.03 for the controller. I don't think that's accurate. I think it's actually 1.05. It might be on 1.03. I said it was no... Anyway, whatever the latest firmware is for the controller, which I think all 8BitDo updates are at support.8bitdo.com. Pretty sure. It's 8BitDo support if you just, search it and stuff and blah, blah, blah. Which on the website, actually, it says there's no update. I've said this before. But if you connect it to the computer and runs the firmware updater, there might be an update for it if you have this controller. Depending on the version, sometimes they ship with the new firmware, sometimes they don't. So it's worth checking. But yeah, it actually works great, and which is great news because on the previous version of the firmware for the XE2, this was my main controller for quite some time, and it was super easy. You just plug it in and then it connected. Because with this controller, it's a good way to put this. I'm pretty sure it uses EDID to determine the device it's connecting to, and then automatically switches into the mode for that device. And I'm pretty sure that's what it is because I've also used this for HID testing, for different inputs and stuff like that. And most of the time for that situation, I plugged it in and it didn't recognize it as anything. But there is a manual mode for switching, which unfortunately is not in the manual for the device. It's not on the website for the FAQ. I found this out because of some post or some other info that I found. And it made sense because a lot of 8BitDo's controllers have been like this since forever, basically. So what you have to do for it to work with the XE2 is you have to hold Y, the Y button, while connecting the USB to the device, and that will enter it into switch mode. Now on the back of the Pro 2 Bluetooth controller, it actually has a physical switch because it has 4 different modes. It has the switch mode, it has X input, D input, and I believe the fourth one is iOS mode or Mac OS mode. And yeah, it doesn't actually detect and connect normally anymore just by plugging it in. But yes, just hold Y while you're connecting it, and it should recognize it as a wired Switch Pro controller, and then just work just fine. So that's working perfectly, and actually in the gameplay testing portion later, this is what I'm going to be using. So the other thing too, with 8BitDo wired controllers, I also said in part 29, the 8BitDo Ultimate wired, which, yeah, definitely is on version 1.05, was no longer compatible. That's not true either. Or accurate. I tried connecting it normally and it wouldn't recognize the controller. It's the same thing. So even though it has the Xbox layout, you still hold Y while connecting the USB to, again, enter Switch mode. This is a controller that works on Nintendo Switch. So it has that functionality to communicate as a wired controller. But you have to hold Y while connecting it. Now, the issue with this, even though this one supports custom profiles like the Pro 2 wired controller does, in Ultimate software, you can only create custom profiles for either Windows or Android. There's no switch option, like there is with the Pro 2 wired controller. So when you enter into switch mode, you can't access a custom profile. Now, this is kind of a problem in my book, for my preference, and this is the same on the Switch as well. Because Ultimate software is how you assign the back buttons, because they have the back paddles that you can typically, what I do is I assign them to be the stick clicks because I find it to be so much more simple, so much simpler. Simpler? Or more simple? More simple doesn't sound right. Simpler, right? Anyway, than actually using the stick clicks, and you can even set the stick clicks to be no input. And you can also adjust all kinds of things like stick sensitivity, trigger sensitivity, macros. You can do a ton of great stuff with Ultimate software. But yes, because there's no switch mode custom profile for this controller, can't use custom profiles on the Nintendo Switch, which I talked about in this controller's video. I don't remember which part that was, but or with this device. I tried connecting it with the other methods, because again, X I think is X input, and holding B while connecting, I believe, is D input. But yeah, no matter what I did, I couldn't access my custom profiles when connecting it, which is kind of a huge bummer because I love this controller, and that's really the only thing they'd have to change to make it like my daily driver is just add the option to make a profile for Switch. I was going to use this as my main controller for the Nintendo Switch as well, but because I couldn't make a custom profile in Ultimate Software, I was just like, no, I'm not going to do this. So, but yes, it does work. You would just have to use it as default. The other thing, the PDP Face-Off Deluxe Plus wired controller. These are now branded as the PDP Rematch Switch controller. They're a little bit different. I've talked about this before on Stick Tips. There's like quite a few of these controllers from PDP that look similar, but they're actually different model numbers, different generations. And previously on some Stick Tips episodes, I've talked about how, oh, this version of the PDP face-off controller is compatible, but this other one isn't. And it's confusing. It really is. Just check. What was the way to do it? Check the model number on the box for the thing, if you can. It's not printed on the controller anywhere. And I couldn't find the differences on like either Amazon or PDP's own website. It was, yeah. So your mileage may vary, but I said before that the random disconnect issue was seemingly fixed. Not really. It was better because stability is just better on this firmware for controllers that work, generally. But no, it still has the disconnect issue. It just doesn't happen all that often in my testing. So, yeah, that's pretty much it, though. Those were the main points I wanted to go over. Everything else I said in part 29 is still accurate according to my testing. So for the SN30 Pro Plus, for the 8BitDo Pro 2, the wireless, the Bluetooth version, the 8BitDo SN30 Pro USB, the Pro 2 for Xbox, all the things I said in part 29, still accurate for those. So it was those three controllers I mainly wanted to clarify on there. And yeah, it's now, in my opinion, which actually let's get to the gameplay testing, because as you guys have probably already figured out, this is Elden Ring. And yeah, in general, it's a good update. It is. The fact that I now have to hold Y to connect the Pro 2 is a little bit annoying, but again, since the Pro 2 wired controller has switch mode as an option in Ultimate Software, you can still use your custom profiles. So this is back paddle left, and this is back pedal right. Mine's, I guess it is just as clicky. It's probably just the way I was pressing it. It's the right stick click obviously is for resetting the camera. Left stick click is for stealth. I think that's default. I can never remember this game because I use slightly custom button mappings. Like I want jump on triangle. I know that's different. I think it's usually X, I think. Crouch and stand up, yeah, L3. And then reset camera, also lock on, and remove target is R3. So personally for me, I like those just being on the back because R3 is a thing that you use a lot in Souls games. Like, because, you know, you're locking on, you're unlocking. Stealth, personally, I don't really use it as much. But the actual latency and responsiveness and everything, it's actually very good. So this is not like the most scientific way to showcase this, because, you know, there's the audio latency, there's the everything has, I know latency is a bad word, kind of everything has latency. There's like the latency of my capture card, the latency of the display that I'm using. The audio latency is a thing too, but anyway, this is circle. Which, depending on, you know, how that actually comes through in the recording, may seem like a pretty good amount of latency, but it's really not. And to be fair, this is the PS5 mode, or this is running on PS5. This is the PS4 version because the Wingman XE2 doesn't work for PS5 games, but it does work for PS4 games on PS5. And I can't actually use PS5's automatic low latency mode right now because of the HDMI splitter that I'm using. And now he notices. But yeah, it's a little bit more responsive if I have the PS5 connected directly to the display and I'm using this exact same setup, because then, yes, I can utilize automatic low latency mode, and it does help reduce latency between inputs and the actual game. So for, like, comparatively to the DualSense, which people are like, oh, that's one thing I like about the DualSense, is the in Bluetooth, the latency is actually very low. And it's like, okay, yes, that is a decent thing about the DualSense. And it's pretty good. However, with a wired controller, it's still lower. It's still faster. So still prefer that. But yeah, it feels great, especially since I did that fix up on this controller for, I believe, part 28 of Stick Tips. I talked about how I had a problem with like the shoulder buttons. Yeah, and I fixed it up, and that was like a week or two the firmware update hit for the XC2, and then I was like, oh cool, I can test it out and make a video about it. And then I thought for sure my preferred controller was no longer compatible. So I'm glad it is. There's just, you know, that annoying workaround of having to hold Y when connecting the USB, because it doesn't feel great. Because you gotta have the USB cable like with one hand and the port, and then like while holding Y with like the other hand, and or whatever your preferred human interface device is. Which a tech joke, but yeah, it's been really good. It's been really good. And the connection stability, like I do prefer the Pro 2 for Xbox as far as like the feel of the controller and everything. But I was having the random disconnect thing with that one as well. This one, it still happens. Like it seems to be more of a global issue. Just with wired controllers with the XE2. But it may also have something to do with like my USB extension cables that I'm using. It could also just be my XE2 personally, because sometimes, you know, there's fluctuations in manufacturing when it comes to devices that are commercially available. So it's not necessarily a problem with Brook's device at all. But this is the one I have. This is what I found during my testing. And yeah. That's pretty much it. So this guy's gonna get pissed and come over here. If you're wondering why he had so much health, I'm on journey like 37 or something like that. So everything is just very strong. And I found out recently, I think those guys, like the guard captain or whoever that guy is, they can drop those shields that they use, which is pretty cool. But yeah, if you find yourself in need of bolts, these guys drop so many bolts. Oh, better sound the horn. He's got an invader. The last guy to notice. I think that was all of them. I believe so. So yes, I did have an issue, and again, the thing with the shoulder buttons too, for the Ipito Pro 2 wired controller, it could have just been mine, although I did have at least one comment, maybe like 2 comments on that video I made about it, where people had the exact same issue. So it might have been a manufacturing thing. Not really sure, but I still think it's a great controller. Like, I still like it a lot. The 8BitDo Pro 2 in general is just like kind of my favorite controller. And the fact that there's a dedicated wired one that's a little bit cheaper but still feels like really good is kind of a huge thing. Although, if you do have one of these adapters and you also play on Xbox, I'd probably just get the Xbox version, because that's a really good controller. And even though it does randomly connect, or randomly disconnect on mine, yeah, it could have something to do with the USB extension cable I use, where maybe it's just not the best connection. So, I don't know. Your mileage may vary. As I said, it's kind of hard when you're talking about things where it could just be the one that you have. It's not doesn't necessarily apply to every single one that went out. But that's how technology rolls, you know? So anyway, as I said, this one was going to be a little bit shorter, a bit more straight to the point, but I also wanted to throw some gameplay in there and kind of just be like, you know, overall testing, blah, blah, blah. This is how it feels and all these other shits. So, thank you all for being here, guys. Greatly appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed. Of course, before we get going, a very special thank you going out to the current Farts and Crap Show members, and we're gonna have like some updates as well. So if you guys are here for the daily updates, we'll get to that as well here in a minute. But special thanks to the people that make it happen: Novalis Draconis, Don Sabino, WTF Corey, who gifted some of these, by the way. Also, Big Diarrhea Dump, Dan Acton, JSpot51, Autumn Mayfield, Sweet Gaming, and Aaron Schick. Thank you all so much for making that milestone of 10 members happen. Very, very highly appreciated. If you guys want to be incredibly awesome like them and get in on all that all that membership goodness, I don't know why that was the first thing my brain went to, but yeah, check out the join button or the link down below talking about the membership. They both direct to the same thing. Yeah, membership tiers start at $3 a month. That's only 10 cents a day. Gets you into all the basic stuff, including getting to vote on the series that get made here on the channel via the members' choice polls. And we do have one going right now for the final week of April 2024. It started late on the 22nd, so I'm just going to say the 23rd, and it's going to be running until the end of the month because they always go for a full 7 days. That's the voting period. At the end of that 7-day period, the votes are tallied. The poll stays up for, talk about that here in a second, but the votes are tallied and the winner is decided. So the poll stays up because any of the previous members' choice polls you've missed, you can still vote on those. That input will be considered for future members' choice polls. So that way, if something is like retroactively popular in a members' choice poll, I will bring it back for a future one, because we don't do repeats very often here on the channel. Occasionally we do, but not very often. But that way I know which options to bring back because people want to see it. But the one for the current members' choice poll is selecting the series that will be the new Retro Classics series. That is following Super Mario Bros. 3. So after the poll is over, a few days later, the first episode will air, and then that will be a daily series in the morning slot, which is noon Eastern. So, yeah, and I think that's it. As far as if you want to stay up to date, right. If you want all the updates in real time, as they happen, not like from the past when I recorded stuff, you guys can keep an eye on the community tab here on the channel, or follow the Twitter or join the Discord. Links are down there in the description, also on the channel banner. But yeah, whenever I post an update for the channel, that's where you find them. It's usually the pinned tweet over on the Twitter. It's usually in the channel updates tab over on the Discord. And you can try the bell thing, notification. I know it doesn't work for a lot of people, or if you're subscribed to a lot of channels, it might just get lost in the shuffle. But that's how to stay up to date on stuff. So, yeah, I think that does it. Yeah, I think it does. And hopefully, before that next series starts, we'll have a proper part 30 here on Stick Tips, because there is another subject matter I want to make a video about, and I've been working on it for quite a while, actually. So, hope you guys are excited about that. It's more of a project video, so may not be ready for a while because there's a lot of different things I want to cover in that one. So, and it requires extensive testing. But anyway, thank you all once again for being here, guys. Till next time, take care, much love, and hope you all have an incredible day.